Okay, this is the last page of the notes. It says if the terminal side of an angle theta passes through the point 8, -15 when graphed in standard position, calculate the values of the 6 trigonometric functions of theta. So the first thing we want to do is graph the point. 8, -15 is going to be in the 4th quadrant, because you would go 8 in the x direction and down 15 in the y direction. So that's going to put you down in the 4th quadrant. We want our right triangle. Forgive me, these will not be drawn to scale, but doing the best I can here. So we have 8 for this side and -15 for this side. We need to find the missing side, and for this triangle, the missing side is the hypotenuse. And so we're going to do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We can let a be 8, and then we have b is the -15, and c is the missing side. You want to make sure when you use your calculator that you do put the negatives in parentheses for sure, because we want to square the negative. And so if we don't put the parentheses in our calculator, it's going to give us a -225, and we definitely want it to wipe out that negative sign for us. So typing this in the calculator, I would just type it all in at once as the square root of 8 squared plus parenthesis -15 squared, and it's going to give you your answer, and that happens to be 17. So this missing side is 17, and that is one of our Pythagorean triples that we talked about in class today, so maybe you already knew that. So anyway, now we need to go back to the trig functions. So we have 6 trig functions. We have sine, and by the way, theta is here. That's going to be important. So sine of theta is something, cosine of theta is something, tangent of theta is something, and then the other 3 that we need, opposite of sine is going to be cosecant of theta, opposite of cosine is going to be secant of theta, and then opposite of tangent is going to be cotangent of theta. Okay, remember that sine, and let me back up a second and just kind of write this up here. We talked about in class, you have SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so sine for all of these problems is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. And then tangent is going to be opposite over adjacent. And the cosecant is the reciprocal of that. So that's going to be hypotenuse of, it's the opposite or the reciprocal of sine. So it's going to be hypotenuse over opposite. And then our secant is going to be the reciprocal of the cosine. So we're going to have hypotenuse over adjacent. And then cotangent is going to be the reciprocal of our tangent. So it's going to be adjacent over opposite. So we're going to be using all of those for each one of these examples. Okay, so sine is opposite over hypotenuse. When we look at the triangle that we've drawn, the -15 is opposite of theta. 17 is the hypotenuse, and the 8 is adjacent to theta. Okay, so we have sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that's going to give us -15 over 17, and we can just go ahead and flip it over for cosecant, so it's going to be -17 over 15. So all I've done is just done the reciprocal of this. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so that's going to be 8 over 17. For secant, we can just flip it, so it's going to be 17 over 8. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so we have -15 over 8. So for cotangent, we just want to flip it, so it's -8 over 15. Okay, next example. If the terminal side of angle, this is the angle, this is the Greek letter. I believe it's pronounced psi. I wouldn't get all stressed out about that. You can change it back to theta if you want, if you don't want to deal with the weird symbol, but I'm going to call it psi, okay? The Greek letter psi. So if the terminal side of an angle psi passes through the point -724, when graphed in standard position, calculate the values of the 6 trigonometric functions of psi. So we're going to graph this. -7 tells us to go in the negative direction on x, but the 24 tells us to go up. And so we should be in the 2nd quadrant when we graph this triangle. Okay, so again, not worried about drawing it to scale. I'm going to have this right triangle here. I'm going -7 in the x direction and up 24 in the y direction. So again, we need to find the hypotenuse. That's the missing side. So I'm going to do -7 squared plus 24 squared is equal to c squared. So on the calculator, I'm plugging in c is the square root of -7 squared plus 24 squared. And when I work all of that out on the calculator, I get c is equal to 25. Okay, so that is the missing side. And our psi angle, where we like to call it theta normally, is right here. So opposite of that would be the 24. Adjacent to that would be the -7, and then the 25 is our hypotenuse. Okay, so we got to do all 6 trig functions again. So we have our sine of psi, our cosine, and then our tangent. Let's deal with those first, and then we'll flip them over and get the other 3. Okay, so sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so we're going to have 24 over 25. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so I have -7 over 25. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent, so I have 24 over -7. Okay, we are going to do the reciprocals of those. So sine is going to be opposite of cosecant, and then cosine is going to be opposite of secant, and tangent is going to be opposite of cotangent. Okay, and you just flip them over. So we have 25 over 24. It's still going to be negative, but now it's going to be 25 over 7, and then still going to be negative. Now it's going to be 7 over 24. Those would be the answers for that one. So we go to the next example. Suppose theta lies in quadrant 4, and cosine of theta is 5, 6. Find the values of the other 5 trigonometric functions of theta. So we got to get the picture right. So we want to be in quadrant 4. Okay, so coming off the origin, not worried about drawing it to scale, but we have cosine of theta. Theta is right here, and so remember that cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, okay? So adjacent to that angle is 5, and the hypotenuse is 6, and so now we have a missing side that's not the hypotenuse, okay? So I'm going to call this A when I'm solving. So I'm going to say a squared plus 5 squared is equal to 6 squared. Go ahead, out. Not 36, I was going to go ahead and square it. Let's let the calculator do all that for us. So we're just going to say that's 6 squared. So if I subtracted the 5 squared to the other side and then took the square root, then that's what A would be. So I'm going to say A is equal to the square root of 6 squared minus 5 squared. Okay? So when you type that in the calculator, it's going to give you a decimal answer. We don't want decimal answers, we want exact answers. So instead of typing the entire thing in the calculator, just type in the 6 squared minus 5 squared. So that's going to be 36 minus 25, which is 11. And let's leave that as the square root of 11. So you don't want to use the decimal answer, you want to use the exact answer. So this missing side is the square root of 11. Okay, so looking at our theta angle again, square root 11 is opposite of that, 5 is adjacent to that, and then 6 is the hypotenuse. Okay, so even though we have cosine, I'm still going to just do all 6 of them. So I have sine of theta I need to find, cosine of theta, and tangent of theta. Okay, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so it's going to be square root of 11 over 6. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so that's going to be 5 over 6. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so that is square root of 11 over 5. All of those are fine. Don't have any radicals to worry about, but I do notice that I made a mistake right now. Let me stop and clarify and go back, because this actually would make sine incorrect and tangent incorrect. The one thing I missed talking about when I was starting to label is this would actually be negative square root of 11, because in order to get into the fourth quadrant, you go positive in the x direction, but you go down in the y direction. So this is actually negative square root of 11. Okay, so this should be negative square root of 11 over 6, and this should be negative square root of 11 over 5. Sorry about that. Try not to make that same mistake. And one of the ways you can check yourself to make sure that you are getting these correctly with the signs, because that can be tricky sometimes, is remember our little all students take calculus hint. Okay, so if we're over here and we're in the fourth quadrant, then the only trig function that should be positive is cosine, and then its opposite, which is secant. So cosine and secant are going to be positive in this quadrant. Everything else should be negative. So that kind of let me know that I needed to go back and check and see why are sine and tangent not coming out negative, and it's because I forgot that negative right there. So just be aware of that. I'm going to keep going. So sine is opposite of cosecant. Cosine is opposite of secant, and then tangent is opposite of cotangent. Okay, so if you flip them, you get negative 6 over square root of 11. Flip it, you get 6 over 5. Flip it, you get negative 5 over the square root of 11. The negative sign does not go away. Okay, I'm okay with the 6 over 5. I am not okay with these. So what's wrong with them is we cannot have a radical in the bottom. We need to rationalize our denominator. So you're just going to multiply top and bottom by that radical. So here we are left with our final answer of negative 6 square root 11 over 11. And here we have our final answer of negative 5 square root 11 over 11. Okay, so that's our 6 answers. The 6/5 is fine. You don't need to change it to 1 1/5. It is fine as an improper fraction. We don't worry about that in pre-calc. Okay, suppose that psi lies in quadrant 1 this time. Cosecant, let me think a second. Cosecant is opposite of sine, right? So if sine is opposite over hypotenuse, then cosecant is going to be hypotenuse over opposite. Find the values of the other 5 trigonometric functions of psi. So we're in quadrant 1. We have our triangle coming off the origin here. Sorry, guys. Let me fix that back up. Okay, so we have psi here at the origin. We know that the hypotenuse is 7, and then we know that opposite of psi is 4. And so we're going to have to use Pythagorean theorem again to find that missing side, and it's not a hypotenuse, so I'm going to call it a. So I have a squared plus 4 squared equals 7 squared. So I'm subtracting the 4 squared to the other side, and then I'm taking the square root of that. So a would be the square root of 7 squared plus 4 squared. I'm sorry, minus 4 squared, not plus. Okay, because I moved it to the other side, that does make it a subtraction. Okay, so if you plug that in the calculator, you do get a decimal answer again, so let's not go there. So in order to avoid the decimal answer, we're not going to do the square root on our calculator. We're just going to do 7 squared minus 4 squared. So that's 49 minus 16, which is 33. So a is equal to the square root of 33. So this missing side is the square root of 33. Okay, we're in the first quadrant, so it's good that all of our sides of our triangle are positive. Okay, so we're going to go from there. Labeling my sides, if I'm going opposite of psi, that's a 4. The hypotenuse is 7. And so square root of 33 is adjacent. And then I got to do my 6. So I'm doing sine of psi, cosine of psi, tangent of psi. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so we have 4/7 for that one. Cosine is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse, so that's square root of 33 over 7. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so that's 4 over square root of 33. I don't like that at all because I don't want to have a radical in the bottom. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by square root 33. And so that gives me a final answer on that one of 4 root 33 over 33. Okay, so I'm good on the other ones. I can have radicals on top, just not on bottom. Just kind of double checking my answers real quick. Okay, before I move on. So now I'm going to do cosecant, secant, and cotangent of this psi thing. Okay, so all you have to do for cosecant is flip your sign. So that's 7/4. For secant, we're going to flip it, and we'll have to deal with that in a second. For tangent, if I go ahead, instead of working with the last answer, what if I just flip the first thing over here? Then I wouldn't have a radical on the bottom, and I wouldn't have to deal with anything. So just flipping it from the original back to square root of 33/4 is fine. That's good to go. But this one I need to rationalize, so I'm going to rationalize the denominator. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom both by square root 33. So I have 7 root 33 over just 33 would be the final answer there. Guys, hang in there. I got 2 more to go. I'm sorry. I didn't think this was going to take so long, but hopefully this is helping you. Let's keep going. So sine of theta is equal to 1/3. This is a positive ratio, number, however you want to say it. Cotangent is less than 0. If it's less than 0, that just means it's negative. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be negative if it's less than 0. Find the values of cosine, tangent, secant, cosecant, and cotangent. We have to know how to draw this, okay? And so what I'm asking myself is, when we're doing this all students take calculus thing, it really stands for all the trig functions, sine, tangent, and cosine. When I'm looking at that, I'm asking myself, where is sine positive? That cotangent is negative. Remember that cotangent is the opposite of tangent, so tangent would have to be negative as well. So where is sine positive? That tangent is negative. So that would be up here in our second quadrant, okay? So you have your triangle. I'm not going to worry about drawing it to scale. Sorry. Stuff's falling. Maybe I can fit this on here without putting that weight on there. Okay, so we have our right angle here. We have theta here. So according to sine being 1/3, opposite of theta is a 1. The hypotenuse is 3. I need to find the missing side. I'm going to call the missing side A and do our Pythagorean theorem again. So we have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Don't even know why I wrote it all out for you this time, but we have a squared plus 1 squared equals 3 squared. So to get a by itself, we would subtract 1 squared from both sides and then take the square root. So I have a is equal to the square root of 3 squared minus 1 squared. So again, if you plug it in the calculator, you're gonna get a decimal. We don't want that. And so instead of getting a decimal, we're gonna just do 3 squared minus 1 squared. So that's gonna give us the square root of 8, because you have 9 minus 1, so it's 8. Don't wanna leave it as that. Let's change it to 2 square root of 2, because we know that 8 is 4 times 2, so that square root of 4 can come outside and then the 2 stays inside. So our missing side is 2 square root of 2, but it's actually negative. Pay attention to which quadrant you're in. Since you're in the second quadrant, our x coordinate's gonna be negative and our y coordinate's gonna be positive over there. Okay, so let's label everything. We have across from theta is opposite. The 3 is our hypotenuse, and then negative 2 root 2 is going to be our adjacent side. And so then we go for it. Sine, cosine, tangent. And so sine is opposite over hypotenuse. That's going to be 1/3. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So that's going to be negative 2 root 2 over 3. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that's 1 over negative 2 root 2. Okay, I'm not going to stop there because we don't want radicals on the bottom. So we're going to multiply top and bottom by square root of 2. And so that gives me a final answer. See if you can follow this. It's still negative because we have that negative in the bottom. 1 times the square root of 2 is just the square root of 2. Okay, on the bottom, when I do square root of 2 times square root of 2, that's the square root of 4, which is 2. But I can't ignore this 2 that's already out there. So that's going to be 2 times 2. So that gives me a 4 on the bottom there. So that's negative root 2 over 4 would be the final answer for that. We still need to look at what's cosecant of theta, what is secant of theta, and what is cotangent of theta. So cosecant would just be 3 over 1. Let's just call that 3. Secant would be 3 over 2 root 2, and it's negative. We'll fix that in a minute. And then tangent, again, if I just flip the beginning, not this end thing here, if I just flip the beginning, I won't have to worry about rationalizing the denominator because the radical will already be on top. So when I flip this, it's just going to become negative 2 root 2 because putting 1 on the bottom is just kind of understood to be there if it's a whole, you know, if it's, I want to say whole number, it's not really a whole number, but if it's over 1, then it's understood to be that. Okay, so let's fix our secant though. That's not going to work for us. We need to multiply top and bottom both by root 2. And so that gives me a final answer of negative 3 root 2 over 4. Because you have, again, that root 2 times root 2 is root 4. And then the square root of 4 is 2. So 2 times 2 is the 4. Hopefully that makes sense. We got one more. If you've hung in this long, I'm so proud of you. This is going to help you on the quiz next time, I promise, and on the test. Here we go. We have a tangent that's positive. It's 7 over 2. That's a positive number. And then we have cosecant, which is negative because it's less than 0. And remember that cosecant is the opposite of sine, okay? So we're asking ourselves on the all students take calculus thing, where is tangent positive where sine and cosecant are negative? Okay, so I know it can't be here because that's where sine is positive. I know it can't be here because that's where everything is positive. So tangent has to be positive and sine has to be negative. So that's going to be in this third quadrant here. Okay. Draw your triangle. Don't worry about the scale. It's a right triangle. Our angle psi is right there. Okay. And so you might be looking at this right now going, how can I get to this quadrant and have a positive 7 over 2? Well, think about it. If we go negative 7, sorry, let me back up a second. This is opposite, this is adjacent. Okay, so from this angle, if I go across from it, if I go down 7, that represents this side. And if I go adjacent, that represents this side. And so since it's negative over negative, that's going to make it a positive 7 over 2. Hope that makes sense. But to be in this quadrant, both your x and y have to be negative. But then you end up with a positive when you divide negative by negative. Okay, we have to find the hypotenuse on this one. So we're going to say c squared is equal to negative 2 squared plus negative 7 squared. So c is the square root of all that. Okay, and so again, it comes out to a decimal, so don't do the square root part. Just do the negative 2 squared plus the negative 7 squared, which is 4 plus 49, which is the square root of 53. So that hypotenuse is the square root of 53. We're going to label our sides. So opposite of our angle is negative 7, adjacent to our angle is the negative 2, and then the hypotenuse is the square root of 53. Almost there, guys. So we have sine of psi, cosine of psi, and tangent of psi. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So I have negative 7 over square root 53. We'll deal with that in a minute. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So it's negative 2 over square root 53. Again, deal with it in a minute. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that's going to be negative 7 over negative 2. So yes, it is 7 halves like it says up here. So didn't even have to do that one. It's a little extra for us. Okay, so can't have those root 53s on the bottom. So we're multiplying top and bottom both by root 53. Okay, so on sine, that's going to give us a final answer of negative 7 root 53 over just 53. And then same thing on cosine, we want to multiply top and bottom both by root 53. And that's going to give us a final answer of negative 2 root 53 over just 53. Okay, so now we need to get the cosecant, the secant, and the cotangent. Okay, cosecant is going to be the reciprocal of sine. So if you just flip the original, you'll be good to go. So we're at negative square root 53 over 7 And again, it doesn't matter where the negative goes, you have to keep it, but it doesn't matter if you put it on top or bottom. But I'm flipping this so the square root goes to the top. I don't have to fix it, good to go. Secant, I'm gonna flip this one, still negative, so I have square root 53 over 2. And then for cotangent, I need to flip this one, so it's gonna become 2/7. And I think that's it. I hope you hung in there. I hope that helped. See you next class.